happening in the national capital, the G20 Summit. New Delhi is all set to host the G20 Summit a few days from now, and the national capital is all prepped up for the grand event. From security arrangements to managing traffic routes, the host city is being spruced up. With just days to go for the G20 Summit in the national capital, authorities have decided to withdraw significant orders which were impacting the traders and citizens alike. The police in Daryaganj, which is one of the busiest areas of Delhi, have withdrawn their order, shutting shops, offices, vehicle parkings between the 8th and the 10th of September. The Delhi police has withdrawn its previous order, claiming services at several metro stations will be affected during the 3-day period. But the police now say that services will only be affected at the Supreme Court metro station. Remember, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has placed India as the global catalyst and a voice for the global south. This, of course, is India's big moment on the global stage, not only in putting forth our priorities in front of the world, but also in shaping the new geopolitical order. For more perspective on this, let me go across to my guest tonight, Mr. Dilip Sinha, former permanent representative of India to the United Nations, joins us tonight, and somebody who is a very balanced and meticulous voice on international affairs. Thank you very much, Mr. Dilip Sinha, for talking with Mirror Now. Sir, before I go and discuss about India's priorities and what we achieved through this G20 summit, I want to talk about the confirmation that came in today that the Chinese President Xi Jinping will not be attending the G20 summit. And we had been hearing this, but today we got the official confirmation. How do you see this really? Is China trying to undermine India's G20 presidency? Or do you think there are other reasons that can be attributed to the absence of the Chinese president, considering the fact that China is trying to become and play a key role in international affairs at the global stage?
Well, I don't think China has officially given any reason for President Xi not coming to India. It is certainly not because he's not traveling abroad, because only a couple of weeks earlier he had gone to South Africa for a bilateral meeting and thereafter attending the BRICS summit. So he's traveling abroad. So clearly his not coming to India has to do with the fact that India is host and chair of the G20. Now, we know that our relations have been extremely tense over the last few years. And most recently, we have had a series of meetings at the level of military officials, senior military officials, and no progress was made on disengagement at the line of actual control. And thereafter, the bilateral conversation that took place between the two leaders in South Africa, there were differences of interpretation and on what transpired and whether there was any outcome at all. So it is quite clear. And if you look at the Chinese media, you find a certain degree of cynicism about India trying to project itself as a leader of the South or as a prominent country trying to play a role on the international stage. China believes that India is a regional power and therefore should remain confined to the region, which is South Asia. So clearly, if President Xi is not coming to India, it is because he's uncomfortable with the idea of participating in an event in which India takes center stage, and it's the moment of glory for India that India is hosting the world's leading organization. And he's perhaps also jealous of the fact that here is a democracy which is able to organize an event on this scale, whereas China is going through a major economic crisis right now. That could be a little bit of a factor, but I don't think it's a factor in his not coming to India. The not coming to India has to be essentially bilateral and a desire to snub India on this forum.
Sir, the fact that China is not going through a very strong period in terms of its economy, how do you think India can really gain out of this kind of a situation, considering the fact that in the last 2 to 3 years during the COVID pandemic, we did see that global supply chains had been disrupted, and all of that ripple effect happened across the world. Now, for instance, the global supply chains, they cannot be changed overnight, but yes, the process has started from the pandemic. How do you think India can really make the best out of this situation?
Well, India should ensure that it becomes an attractive destination for international capital, whether the capital that is moving out of China or other capital that, that is looking for investment destinations. India is a major destination for investment, but it is not big enough yet. It is not able to attract the kind of capital that it should be attracting. And for that, we need to have internal reforms and policy changes to ensure that we become the leading destination of international investment, at least in the global south. Uh, that said, there are also other factors that lead to this, especially joining global supply chains, where you have to have logistical efficiency, uh, cutting costs to ensuring that our traders and international traders who come to India are able to use this as a place where there is the cost of operations is competitive. All these factors will help India become benefit not only from its own growth, but also from the fact that China is going through a difficult phase right now, both on account of its economic downturn as well as its extremely aggressive foreign policy.
Hmm. Sir, this year, India's G20 presidency, we've put forth our priorities, our agendas, whether it's about peace and harmony, whether it's climate change, all of these priorities have been put forth by India for its G20 presidency. Now that we're just a few days, left for this summit to happen in the national capital, what are the things that you will be looking out for in this very crucial summit?
In the summit, there are a number of issues that are of concern to the global south. And here, India will essentially be espousing the causes that it has been doing in various international fora on behalf of the global south and on its own behalf as well, to ensure that there is a fairer rules-based multilateral trading system, that climate finance is forthcoming, all the pledges made by the industrialized countries for giving assistance to developing countries, then sustainable finance flows coming to developing countries, and of course, investment in the infrastructure, particularly in the digital infrastructure. These are areas that we have been prioritizing all through these years. But today, we have an opportunity to put them up front in a forum which is a forum that encompasses all regions of the world, north, south, east, west. And this is the forum where India can then actually ensure that the global South's voice is adequately represented in the declarations that are adopted. In addition, there is the more difficult and more tricky issue of the Ukraine war, where India has taken a position that this is not an era of war, but things have gone worse since the last summit of the G20 at Bali, and positions have hardened on both sides. So that will be a lot trickier for India to pursue
Yeah.
at this
Mr.
at
Sinha,
this
which
summit.
which is what leads me to my next question. Yeah, which is what leads me to my next question, Mr. Sinha, is the fact that G20 is such a wholesome representation of the world. We've got the developed as well as the developing economies in the G20 grouping. And therefore, how do such differing economies with different perspectives and standpoints on various challenges that the world faces come to a consensus? Because the basis of this whole grouping is that it's a collaborative format. It aims to find solutions together to common challenges. Now, for instance, like you mentioned, the Russia-Ukraine war, countries with different perspectives and different stands are there in the G20. How does such a grouping then come to a conclusion, find consensus on different challenges?
That is a challenge. What happens in the case of the G20 declaration is that you cover almost all the subjects under the sun, and you fall back upon the previous declarations and see what kind of consensus was arrived at there. Now, the G20 is not a decision-making body. It is not a negotiating forum. What it does is that on most issues, it reiterates goals that have already been set in the various other multilateral organizations that are dedicated to those particular negotiations. For example, in the case of climate change, you have the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change, or in trade, you have the World Trade Organization. So similarly, you have other organizations like the IMF and the BIS, the Bureau of International Settlements. So these organizations are negotiating on various issues. What the G20 does is it reiterates the decisions or the aspirations of the leaders to act as some kind of a guide for these organizations to go back and start working on these. There are some issues like international taxation, which are exclusively in the domain of the G20. Now, in the case of the Ukraine war, what's happened is that at Bali, there were two paragraphs that were adopted in the Bali Declaration. One referred to the UNGA resolution deploring Russian aggression in Ukraine. And then it took on the other conciliatory paragraph saying that this is not an era of war. Now, what's happened is that after Bali, the Russian position has become harder. And because of that, Russia is no longer prepared to accept one of those paragraphs, which refers to the UNGA resolution deploring the Russian aggression, as a consensus document. So if you look at the documents adopted so far by the various ministerial meetings so far held in India, they have one paragraph, which is an outcome document, and a preceding paragraph, which is a chair's summary. Now, a chair's summary is different from an outcome document in the sense that the outcome document is an adopted consensus document representing the views of all the members, and a chair's summary merely gives the viewpoints of different groups of members. So the paragraph that states that most members condemned the war in Ukraine had been part of the outcome document at Bali, but now Russia insists that that should be a chairman's summary and not an outcome document. So almost all the documents being adopted right now have a paragraph which is a chairman's summary, which gives one sentence representing the fact that there were other views and other expressions on and divergent views on the issue of sanctions. And then there is a consensus paragraph, which also is taken from Bali. So a lot of the documents in these multilateral meetings are essentially rehashes of previous declarations, because eventually in 1 year, 1 year is too short a time for making major progress in international relations and international negotiations.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have to see how this really pans out, with India having her big diplomatic moment and big diplomatic blockbuster that is all set to take place in New Delhi. But for now, I'm going to have to wrap it up. Mr. Dilip Sinha, thank you very much for joining us on Mirror Now. Always a pleasure talking to you, Ambassador. Thank you very much. And now let's